Just 1 week before Christmas in 2022, a pregnant woman was brutally murdered inside her own home while her boyfriend was doing something that quickly ruled him out as a suspect. For more than 6 hours, he was live on YouTube. People could watch him, hear him, and they could see him sitting right in front of his computer playing video games at the exact same time that his girlfriend and future child's lives were being taken from them. But months later, detectives found something strange, and then everything unraveled from there. What looked like one of the strongest alibis investigators had ever seen started to look like something entirely different. Was that live stream exactly as it appeared to be, or was it the key to solving Natalie McNally's murder all along? Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. For today's case, we're going to be taking a trip overseas to Ireland, so please forgive me in advance if I mispronounce any words in today's video. All right, my friends, let's get started. Natalie McNally was born on October 27, 1990, to her parents Noel and Bernie McNally. She grew up as the only girl alongside her three brothers, Niall, Declan, and Brendan, and her family was very tight-knit. The family lived in Northern Ireland, and they went to concerts, football matches, and GAA games together. Natalie, who was also lovingly known as Nats, was truly adored by her family, and all of the boys treated her like a princess. In an interview with her brother Niall, he mentioned that they treated her as this precious little egg, but in reality, she was a fiercely strong and independent young woman. Natalie attended Lurgan Model Primary School, and her teacher said that she was a kind, caring, and capable person with a smile for everyone. Her mom, Bernie, had even worked there at one point. Academically, Natalie was sharp, and she put all the hard work in, and her dad said that she had worked tirelessly at school and that she was very smart. Eventually, she earned a degree in law and then went on to get her master's degree in marketing. Natalie built a career working in the marketing team at TransLink, which is Northern Ireland's public transport system, and she loved that job. Natalie also had been living with type 1 diabetes ever since she was a child, and I want to talk a little bit about that because a lot of people mix up type 1 and type 2, and they are not the same thing. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition. The immune system attacks the beta cells in the pancreas, which are the cells that are responsible for producing insulin. Once those cells are gone, they're gone. The pancreas stops making insulin entirely, and without insulin, glucose can't get into the body's cells to be used as fuel. It builds up in the blood instead, and without intervention, that's a medical emergency every single time. Natalie was managing her condition every hour of every day. Every time she ate, exercised, had a stressful day, or even a rough night of broken sleep, all of it impacted her blood glucose levels, and all of it requires a response. There are no days off from type 1 diabetes. You're calculating, monitoring, dosing, and adjusting constantly. And as a nurse, I've watched people do this for years, and the level of discipline and self-awareness that it requires is something that most people genuinely don't understand unless they live with it. That tends to be the case with many chronic illnesses, and I'm sure that most of you watching can relate personally or at least know what that's like. Outside of work, though, and managing her health, Natalie was also just a really fun person to be around. She was a huge Everton sports fan and enjoyed watching all of the games with her family. She also loved music, specifically bands, but the Killers were her favorite band. Natalie loved animals, and she had 2 cats and a big German shepherd named River of her own. She was only 32 years old when today's story takes place, and her dad said that she was happier than he had ever seen her. She was planning a future, and she had everything that she ever wanted coming toward her. And then somebody came through her door and took all of that away. In August of 2022, Natalie McNally was on the dating app called Bumble. This is where she met a man named Stephen McCullagh. They matched, and on August 7th, 2022, he sent her a WhatsApp message, and his pickup line was, "Hey Nat, it's that robot weirdo from Bumble." The two of them hit it off, and they planned their first date for that very same week. The relationship moved pretty quickly, and the couple seemed genuinely happy together. McCullagh met Natalie's family by October, and he was welcomed by them with open arms. From the outside, everything looked the way a new relationship is supposed to look. 2 people getting to know each other, meeting the family, and Natalie was glowing. But by November, Natalie told her family something that changed everything. She was pregnant. She was expecting McCullagh's child, and this baby was a precious little boy. Natalie was planning to get a house together with Stephen, and she could not wait to start their lives together as a little family. Now, to get to know Stephen a little bit, Stephen McCullagh was born and raised in Lisburn, Ireland, and he went to Fort Hill Integrated College. He studied filmmaking, and he seemed to be interested in all things media, which naturally led him to online content creation. He called himself the internet man-child who loved Doctor Who, Grand Theft Auto, robots, and all types of sci-fi collectibles too, and many of his followers and community identified with that. Stephen had a niche, an audience, and an online persona that people seemed to really like. His YouTube channel was called Vote Saxon07, and he started his channel in 2010 when he posted his first video by reviewing a screwdriver toy. That set the tone for everything else that followed: toys, collectibles, prop replicas, and all kinds of merchandise reviews, and he was meticulous about every detail of his content. By the time he met Natalie, he was in his early 30s, living alone in a house at Woodland Gardens in Lisburn. Sadly, his mom Heather died in 2014, and then his dad John died the following year, so he was no stranger to grief or loss. That is very young to navigate life without both of your parents. He also had a little dog named Smokey, and he also passed away in September of 2022, just weeks before he sent Natalie that first message. When Natalie came into his life in the fall of 2022, she was a breath of fresh air to him. He seemed to be so in love, according to everybody around them, and grateful to be entering into this new chapter of parenthood with Natalie, even though things had been moving quickly for them. As we know, though, not everything is always as it seems. Stephen went through Natalie's phone at some point, and he found text messages between her and other men. Some of these messages actually talked about wanting to end the relationship with Stephen, which was a total shock to him because they were already pregnant and planning to buy a home together. Natalie had also been in a previous on and off again relationship with someone that she met on Tinder back in 2019. That relationship had continued for a few years, and the last time that they saw each other was actually at Natalie's home in October of 2022, just weeks into her new relationship with Stephen. As far as his exes go, though, Stephen's ex-girlfriend of 7 years said that he had been physically violent with her on multiple occasions throughout their relationship. But then she revealed something else that was equally disturbing. In early 2022, she gave birth to their baby, and sadly the baby was stillborn, so the baby didn't live. She was grieving and was in counseling, and some of those sessions were actually at Stephen's home. Instead of being a present father and partner that also just lost his child, he set up a way to secretly record her during that therapy. Could you imagine that? That is so eerie and such a major violation of privacy. In addition to harming his ex-girlfriend and secretly recording her, at a previous apartment, he had been so enraged by a female tenant rejecting him that he threw a dumbbell through her window. So, as we can see, there's a pattern of control, surveillance, and/or violence. So now that you know a little bit about Natalie and Stephen, let's get into what happened next. On December 14th, 2022, Stephen McCullagh sat down at his computer to work on YouTube. He opened up his streaming software and recorded 6 hours and 4 minutes of himself playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. He was drinking alcohol and swearing at the screen as he was playing his games. Then, oddly enough, he would randomly shout out the time repeatedly throughout the recording and said that he wasn't able to access his chats. These were specific time checks, almost as if he wanted timestamps to prove that he was home and on the live stream at a specific time. He called the video the Violent Night Christmas Live Gaming Stream. Then he saved and downloaded the video on early December 15th. So, to break that down a little further, he pre-recorded a stream for what was supposed to be streaming live. Remember this. On December 18th, Stephen McCullagh told his friends he was planning to do a live stream on YouTube that night and invited them to come watch. He even texted Natalie about it, which we'll get into a little later on, but according to Stephen, he streamed that night and made plans to go see Natalie the following day. On Monday, December 19th, Stephen McCullagh posted a YouTube video, then he went over to his girlfriend's house as planned. But when he walked in, he made a horrifying discovery. Natalie had been brutally murdered, and that meant that their baby was gone too. He immediately called 999 at about 10 p.m., and he was completely distraught and crying, saying there's blood everywhere, and telling the operator, please come as soon as you can, she's pregnant and she's cold. When the Police Service of Northern Ireland, or PSNI, officers and paramedics got there, they found Natalie lying in a pool of blood at the top of her stairs in her townhouse, which was next to the living room. She was laying on her back, and the scene was gruesome. Blood was on the floor and all over Natalie and even up the walls. Constable Feely found a knife on the living room floor just a few feet away from Natalie's body, and several officers mentioned that as soon as they entered the home, They smelled a foul odor, so this couldn't have been an attack that happened that same day. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere at the property either. The doors were not broken, and none of the windows were smashed in, so this meant that Natalie likely opened her door to a person that killed her. She knew this person, and she trusted them enough to let them into her home on a Sunday evening a week before Christmas. Stephen was there on scene, visibly distressed and trying his best to perform CPR, but he couldn't keep it together. I mean, this was his partner and his child. He was crying and shaking, and he told the officers that he believed Natalie's former partner had been harassing her and that that was the person that they needed to be looking at. But before we get into the investigation and what happened next, we need to talk about the autopsy. The postmortem exam on Natalie McNally was performed on December 21st, 2022, 3 days after she was killed. It was done by Dr. James Linus, the state pathologist for Northern Ireland, and it was so complex that he actually had to perform a second exam the following day, followed by a CT scan to assess her internal injuries. That was the first time I'd ever heard of this in the true crime space. We usually see additional autopsies when a finding is in question or families request an independent exam, but this tells us how much the ME had to go over and confirm. Dr. Linus described Natalie as a slim, petite woman at only 5 feet 5 inches tall. Toxicology tests confirmed that there was no alcohol in her system at the time of her death, but there was a therapeutic level of an antidepressant medication present, meaning she was taking her meds as prescribed. This all means that, sadly, Natalie was fully alert and aware of what was happening to her during her final moments. I'm sure that you've heard this term in other true crime cases, but what was done to Natalie was considered overkill, meaning more than one of her injuries would have absolutely been fatal. So let's talk more about that now. Dr. Linus found bruising on both the left and right side of Natalie's neck, and he described the pattern of those bruises as circular, consistent with fingertips. His exact words were that the injury was suggestive of the neck being forcibly grasped by a hand, also known as manual strangulation. As we know from several other recent cases, manual strangulation is not quick whatsoever. To strangle someone manually, you have to maintain sustained force, and this is a very close contact, intimate way to take someone's life. There was so much force involved that Natalie sustained fractures to the bones of her neck. The hyoid bone sits at the base of the tongue, and it's one of the only bones in the entire human body that doesn't connect to another bone. It floats, and it's held in place by soft tissue and muscles. Because of that, it's particularly vulnerable when force is applied to the neck, and a fractured hyoid bone is one of the strongest forensic indicators of strangulation. Natalie's hyoid bone was fractured. In addition to the strangulation, Natalie sustained 3 stab wounds to her neck. The neck is one of the most dangerous areas of the body to be stabbed because of how much critical anatomy is packed into that tiny, small space. There's the carotid arteries that supply blood to the brain, the jugular veins returning blood from it, the trachea carrying air to the lungs, and the larynx at the top of the airway are all right there close to the surface. A knife entering the neck has multiple opportunities to hit life-sustaining structures simultaneously, so even one stab would have been potentially life-threatening, but 3? That many wounds to the neck tells us that this was not a single act in the heat of the moment. It was repeated and targeted, and each wound compounded what the previous one had already done. Dr. Linus also documented 5 lacerations or cuts to Natalie's scalp, and each of them were caused by a blunt object striking her head with enough force to literally split the tissue apart. Some injuries were consistent with being punched, so again, this tells us how angry her attacker was. She even had facial fractures from these repeated hits. A neuropathologist examined Natalie's brain tissue microscopically, and he found evidence suggesting that she actually survived for a short period of time after the assault, which is absolutely heartbreaking to think about. He came to this determination because food was also found in her lungs, also known as aspiration, and this happens when someone is unconscious and can no longer protect their airway, and stomach contents move up and then get inhaled. Its presence in the lungs confirmed that Natalie was still alive and still breathing for some period of time after the violence stopped. She opened the door for a monster and survived at least part of the brutal attack before her body finally gave out. Bruising was also found on Natalie's left wrist and right arm, and the ME said that these were likely defensive wounds from her raising her arms to try to protect herself. Natalie fought back hard, and she wasn't only fighting for her life, she was fighting for her son too. Dr. Linus confirmed the presence of a male fetus at approximately 15 weeks gestation in her womb, and because Natalie succumbed to her injuries, he lost his heartbeat too. Natalie had chosen the name Dean for her baby, and at only 15 weeks, he lost what should have been his future at the hands of whoever did this too. So, not one, but two futures were stolen in the house on that night of December 18th, 2022. Now, to go back to the investigation, Stephen McCullagh was arrested at the scene on suspicion of murder, so he was brought in for questioning, but he immediately asked for representation. His solicitor, or attorney for those of us in the US, came the next day for questioning, and the solicitor directed him to say no comment to over 80 questions about what he was doing on the 18th and his relationship with Natalie. The only part that he did speak up on was that he denied any involvement in her death and said that he was live streaming on the 18th. He said that he didn't see her until the 19th when he walked in and found her murdered. He doubled down on his allegation that Natalie's ex-partner had been harassing her too. The police immediately looked into this whole YouTube alibi. They did find his channel, and they found that 6-hour gaming stream that was dated for the 18th, so at this point, it seemed like Stephen was telling the truth. He appeared to be 18 miles away at his house in Lisburn throughout the entire evening. The police felt like this was a solid alibi, so he was released. The PSNI launched a major murder investigation to look for any suspects, and they reviewed over 3,000 hours of CCTV footage. They did hundreds of door knocks to see if anybody nearby saw anything, and they even posted a Crime Stoppers reward of up to £20,000 for any new information. Officers revisited Natalie's home at Silverwood Green multiple times, and Detective Chief Inspector Neil McGinnis put out a public statement that said, "The McNally family are living out any family's worst nightmare, and they're doing it with extreme dignity. Stop the anguish. Come forward, because at some point, I will knock at your door." The investigators kept hitting dead end after dead end, and this is when they decided to look back at that gaming stream, but more carefully. That's when everything changed. Detective Constable Matthews of the Cybercrime Unit discovered that the streaming software that McCullagh had been using was called OBS Studio. During a genuine live broadcast, OBS is actively processing and transmitting continuously. During any pauses in that content, the software keeps running in the background. There's always background activity, but during the pauses in McCullagh's so-called live stream, there was none. That is technically impossible during a genuine live broadcast. The software had to be running, but it wasn't. This was a major red flag, but now they needed to figure out why. The forensic analysis found an original file tucked away in the trash of Stephen's computer. This was a single, continuous 6-hour and 4-minute recording that was actually created on December 14th and then saved in the early hours of December 15th. This was 4 days before Natalie was killed. That file was then manually deleted by him shortly after midnight on December 19th, which was after he had already called 999 to report finding her body. He was erasing evidence. Digital analysis also confirmed that there was no user interaction with McCullagh's computer at any point between 6 p.m. on December 18th and 12:05 a.m. on December 19th. There wasn't even so much as a single keystroke or mouse movement. The recording was just playing by itself. Now that they knew he was lying, the police looked into everything else possible to figure out where he actually was. On the afternoon of Sunday the 18th, Natalie was at Stephen's house in Lisburn. We know this from phone records and CCTV footage. What I found disturbing, though, was that while she was there with him in his home, he was on his phone searching bus and train timetables. He was looking up the route from Dunmurry, which is about 2 miles from his house, to Lurgan for the following day. He was planning his escape route from her home while she was sitting right next to him. That tells us that this was not a crime of passion or a moment of rage. That is someone who made a decision and was calmly organizing the logistics of how to carry it all out. It does not get more premeditated than that. At 4 p.m., he posted to promote the staged live on his YouTube channel, framing it as a live event starting at 6 p.m. So now, not only has he asked his friends to watch, he was also going public with that alibi too. CCTV captured Natalie's car leaving Stephen's address that afternoon to go watch the World Cup with her family. Cameras also captured Stephen walking to a nearby store shortly after she left to buy some alcohol. At 5:57 that evening, he sent Natalie a WhatsApp message telling her that he was off to stream the night away, and she wrote back, "Good luck. I might have to take a peek at your live stream later." She was rooting for him, and she had no idea that he was already headed her way. At 6, that pre recorded live stream went live on his YouTube channel, and his phone went inactive at that very same moment. About 30 minutes later, so about 6:36 p.m., nearby cameras caught a man walking near McCullaugh's house in Lisburn. This person was wearing dark clothes, gloves, light colored shoes, and they were carrying a green shopping bag, and their face was covered. The prosecution said that this person was Stephen McCullagh heading to the bus stop. At 7:36 p.m., bus cameras showed that same figure with their face still covered boarding a TransLink bus in Dunmurry, and this bus was headed to Lurgan. After getting off, cameras tracked him throughout the town streets, down Market Street, onto William Street, then Luff Road, and then finally into Silverwood Green, which is the cul-de-sac where Natalie lived. At 8:24 p.m., Natalie logged into YouTube and watched part of what she believed was her boyfriend's live gaming stream. Her final act in their relationship was to be a supportive girlfriend, not knowing that this man was already walking up her street. That is so unnerving. The pathologist estimated Natalie's time of death to be between 8:50 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, December 18, 2022, which fell perfectly into this time window. At approximately 9 p.m., Natalie's next-door neighbor heard screaming coming from her flat, and she also saw a large shadow on the patio blinds. The neighbor on the opposite side also described hearing screaming from her property around the same time, so two separate people heard Natalie fighting for her life, and they had no way of knowing what was actually happening on the other side of that wall. At 9:30 p.m., the figure was seen leaving the Silverwood area, but this person was wearing a different outfit from when they first arrived. He walked back through Lurgantown, and at 10:46 p.m., a taxi driver named Jeff McAvoy picked him up outside of a pub called Fa Joe's Bar and Grill on Carnegie Street. The man directed McAvoy to a house in Lisburn, and the taxi's GPS logs confirmed a stop outside of Stephen McCullaugh's address at Woodland Gardens at 11:11 p.m. 1 minute later, at 11:12, CCTV at McCullaugh's own property showed a figure arriving and throwing two items over a hedge, and then at 11:16, McCullaugh's phone was unlocked and it became active for the first time in over 5 hours. Something else that was strange was that around the 3-hour mark of the recording, the video shows McCullagh choosing to play a specific optional side mission in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. This was called Waste the Wife. The objective of this mission is to kill a woman and then stage the death as an accident. And remember, he also called that stream Violent Night too. The prosecution said that these were deliberate Easter eggs, and of course, the defense just called it a coincidence. But let me know what your thoughts are on that. The following day, on December 19th, 2022, while Natalie was laying dead in her home in Lurgan, Stephen McCullagh posted a 6-minute YouTube video reviewing a Star Wars lightsaber toy. He was in his pajamas, and he gave the toy a negative review, and he posted it on his channel. After this went up, he went to Natalie's house to stage the discovery of her body, and that's when he called 999. Because of all these discoveries, on January 31st, 2023, the PSNI re-arrested him. On February 2nd, he was charged with the murder of Natalie McNally. When he was at the courts, he didn't say a single word. When all of this new evidence was shared with Stephen, he admitted that the video had been pre-recorded around December 14th. His new explanation was that he had spent that Sunday evening drinking heavily, and then he just fell asleep at his house. He claimed that someone else deliberately created a trail of circumstantial evidence to frame him. Stephen McCullagh spent more than 3 years in custody at HMP Magaberry Jail while he waited for his trial. During that time, several attempts to secure bail were rejected. The trial was delayed until November of 2025 after investigators uncovered about 30,000 additional pages of evidence that had to be reviewed before proceedings could continue on. Finally, on February 16, 2026, a jury made up of 6 men and 6 women were sworn in, and the trial lasted 5 weeks. From the very beginning, the prosecution argued that Natalie McNally's murder had been carefully planned and carried out by McCullagh alone. The jurors were told that everything McCullagh did afterwards, from his emotional 999 call to his public displays of grief and even his attempts to point suspicion toward her former boyfriend, was all a part of a calculated effort to avoid responsibility. Side note, her ex-boyfriend was arrested and cleared quickly because he had a solid alibi. He had nothing to do with the murder of Natalie or Dean. McCullagh never testified in his own defense, and his own legal team called no witnesses and presented no independent evidence. Instead, the defense decided to argue that the prosecution's case was completely circumstantial and that someone else could have been responsible. One of the most surprising parts of this trial was about McCullagh's behavior at Natalie's wake on Christmas Day in 2022. He sat with her grieving parents, cried, showed them an engagement ring that he bought for Natalie, and told them the story of how he found her body. Her family immediately noticed that his story did not match what he'd previously told them, though. These contradictions were small. However, they painted a picture of someone that was juggling multiple versions of events while carefully managing how others saw him. On March 23, 2026, after only 2 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Cheers erupted in the courtroom from Natalie's family and from the public, and Stephen McCullagh showed little to no reaction at all. Within hours of the conviction, YouTube terminated his channels, and after his conviction, he told a probation officer that he could have been responsible for Natalie's death, but said that he had no memory of what happened after that night. He also referred to himself as a monster, and the prosecutors said that these statements were yet another attempt to manipulate how he would be viewed in the future. On June 3, 2026, Justice Patrick Kinney sentenced McCullagh to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 31 years. The judge said that Stephen planned the murder in remorseless detail and described the attack as both frenzied and extraordinarily violent. Despite the brutality of the assault, though, the judge said that it was ultimately a cold-blooded and calculated killing because of the extensive planning beforehand and McCullagh's actions afterward. He called the crime the most extreme form of domestic violence that he'd ever seen, and added that violence against women by intimate partners remained a serious and recurring problem in Northern Ireland. He also spoke beautifully about Natalie, describing her as strong, loving, intelligent, and independent. She was a young woman who was passionate, funny, and deeply loved. Stephen did not receive additional charges for Little Dean, by the way. Outside of the courthouse, Natalie's father, Noel, fought back tears, and he said that while the sentence brought a small measure of justice, it was not something that they could celebrate. He said, quote, "Over the past 3.5 years, our family has been through unimaginable pain and grief from the loss of our beautiful Natalie. Today is not a celebration of the sentence handed down, as Bernadette, my boys, and myself are all living a life sentence since the murder of our beloved Natalie," end quote. Those 3.5 years took an enormous toll on their family. Natalie's family attended every hearing, every vigil, and every painful milestone in this case. Before we go, though, I want to bring things back to Natalie. As we know, she was the only girl in the family who thought that she was the son. She had so many passions, including sports, her 2 kitties, and her German Shepherd. She loved music, and above all else, she was excited to become a mom. But everything that she loved and was looking forward to in the future was senselessly stolen from her. The Natalie McNally Foundation was set up by her family to advocate for change and to keep her memory alive. Her brothers organized a 5-day walk from Craigavon to Croke Park, covering 80 miles on foot to raise money in her name, and Everton FC made a tribute for her at Goodison Park by putting up a picture of her on the big screen. When their new stadium opened, a memorial stone was dedicated in her honor there too. Her family went over for the unveiling, and her brother Declan said that seeing her name there, knowing that it would be there long after they were all gone, was overwhelming. More than 1,000 people attended a vigil in Lurgan Park for Natalie and Dean. Pink and blue balloons were released in Natalie's memory outside of her parents' home, one color for her and one for Dean. Natalie was buried at St. Coleman Cemetery in Lurgan, and the funeral was held at her parents' home in Craigavon. Hundreds of mourners lined the cul-de-sac to pay respects to her, and one final piece of music played at the service, which was Human by The Killers, her favorite band. Thank you so much for listening to Natalie and Dean's story today. I still cannot believe the level of evil, planning, and anger behind this case, so I'm looking forward to seeing what your thoughts were too. Make sure to do something good for your hearts this week, nurse's orders, and drop a butterfly in the comments if you made it this far into today's video. I'll see you next weekend.